Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few meeting controls for folks who are not familiar with Zoom. Next slide, please. We will have live language interpretation at today's meetings. I will explain how to select your preferred language now in English. Written instructions are provided on your screen now in Spanish and Chinese. And your meeting webinar controls are at the bottom of your screen. Please click Interpretation. Then click the language that you would like to hear. Even participants listening in English should select English so they can hear any comments being spoken in other languages. Next slide, please. This meeting will also include ASL interpreters. The meeting host will spotlight the interpreters to ensure that they can be seen at all times. The ASL interpreters expect to switch approximately every 20 minutes. If at any point you cannot see the interpreter, please let us know. Please let the tech support know using the chat. Next slide, please. We will also have closed captions for this meeting. If you do not see the captions, please press the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen to get them started. We will just to also let folks know that we will also take questions and comments around 6:30 once the presentation is complete. If at any point during the meeting you have any technical questions about Zoom or the accessibility features of today's meeting, please chat tech support. Next slide, please. On today's call, we are joined by Kat Benish, MBTA Chief of Operations and Strategy, Policy and Oversight, as well as Melissa Delea, Senior Director of Service Planning. We would also like to acknowledge the elected officials who have joined us here today. And now I'd like to turn things over to Kat to get us started. Kat?
Great, thank you, Angel. And a very good evening for everyone who's able to join tonight. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy evenings. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation tonight. As Angel said, we'll be giving a hopefully short presentation on both reminding everyone of the context of forging ahead and then walking through some specific details about the proposed changes that go in effect this spring. I will state up front that we will not be spending much time on the changes that have already been implemented, but really focusing on the new ones coming this March and April. And then quickly hand it back over to Angel for Q&A. So without further ado, so just reminding everyone, I think some of you were part of this process likely in November and December, but just for everyone as a reminder, this is part of our Forging Ahead process, which critically, I want to state, is meant to be an iterative process. We are presenting today on the service changes being implemented this spring as part of Forging Ahead, and I do want to caveat, for those who are following closely, we brought all of our proposed changes to our Fiscal Management and Control Board, who voted on it in mid-December. Since that vote, we have received additional funding from the federal government, which I will speak about briefly, which is being used to offset some of those changes approved in December. Specifically, we are not implementing all of the bus changes, and we are restoring some of the late night commuter rail service that was also approved by the board in December. And that's weekday late night commuter rail. I will also note we are planning to review the impact of these changes and adjust service based on both crowding and demand on an ongoing basis. The MBTA, we review and change our schedules on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, depending on the mode, and have some ability to do some more on a less so on a real-time basis. And we're also, as part of this, as we think about restoring service in the future months and years, already going through a longer term process with both bus and commuter rail, thinking about how do we transform both of these systems to better serve our riding public and communities, both based on a lot of strategic work done pre-pandemic, but also now thinking about how mobility and transportations have changed post-pandemic. And when we think about service, we're trying to do so in line with those redesign and transformation plans. At a high level, our spring 2021 service changes, we are trying to change service to better reflect our ridership and fundamentally ensure that we will continue to preserve and provide quality and reliable service for transit critical communities. And I'll speak more about that in a bit. But fundamentally, these changes are meant to, we're trying to accelerate our service changes sooner than we originally proposed early last fall, so that we can increase service sooner when ridership increases. So we have that flexibility. 2, trying to optimize service with our limited resources. And 3, trying to build in flexibility so we can make changes to the degree possible based on what we observed this spring in terms of ridership patterns. I think this is a really helpful chart. We show it all the time, and it's really just trying to help understand what does ridership on the T look like today. So this is a chart that indexes our ridership by mode back to the last week of February. And each line corresponds to a mode or line. So yellow is bus, the dotted black line is our paratransit division, the ride. Blue, orange, red, and green correspond to their respective rapid transit line. The purple is the commuter rail, and the dotted blue is the ferry. The important things to draw from this are: 1, our ridership dropped off fairly precipitously in early March. It has slowly been rebuilding and restoring, essentially since through September of 2020. Where it's remained relatively flat or partially dropped off, which is seasonally consistent with what we've seen pre-pandemic. And throughout the pandemic, our bus, the blue line, and the ride, which is our paratransit division, have had the most durable, which means essentially the largest percentage of the ridership has continued to ride throughout the pandemic, followed then by rapid transit, with commuter rail and the ferry having been the least durable throughout the pandemic. This is, of course, at the modal level, and when you look at sort of any particular one bus route or any particular one trip on a commuter rail, there is significant variation. So I think the key point here is we're essentially, our high water mark for ridership was essentially September and October of 2020. Inside of that, just I think helpful again to give some context of what we're seeing and how we made and what drove some of the decision making. Again, as I spoke about bus, ridership has remained most steady on those bus routes and modes, especially bus, and that it dropped less during those early weeks of the pandemic and was rebounding faster than many of the other modes. We have seen ridership has been the highest on those routes and modes that serve essential trips, and I'll define that in just a sec. Second, where we serve our minority and low-income communities, those areas that have geographic barriers, think like the Boston Harbor, that make walking and biking more difficult as mode choices, and communities with fewer residents who can work from home. In comparison, we see that ridership has been lowest on those routes that serve primarily work commuters, especially traditional 9-to-5 commuters, communities with more residents who can work from home, and communities with more access to vehicles and other modes of transportation. So generally, that's where we've seen lower ridership and less durable ridership throughout the pandemic, which I think is a very self-evident statement, but I think it's important to make. So with that, the Forging Ahead process was really trying to identify, with limited resources, rather than reducing service everywhere in the system, how do we make sure that we continue to provide what we would say is our minimum acceptable service, which is defined by our service delivery policy, which defines our acceptable service based on hours of operations, frequency, so how often buses and trains come, how many people do you ever want on a vehicle, which is crowding for us, and saying we want to ensure that what we call our essential services are always at or above those minimum standards. And we defined our essential services using this 2x2 framework, and everything in the top left box is what we'd call an essential service. And that's something that we consider highly transit critical, which meets one or more of 5 definitions based on analysis on communities of color, low-income populations, households with no or low car access, routes or modes with a high riders who are seniors or people with disabilities. And then also a combination of what we consider high ridership potential, which is where we saw a combination of both high ridership pre-COVID and durable ridership throughout the pandemic. So based on those factors, we said the top left box, those are our essential trips or modes. And what qualified as that based on that analysis is Blue Line, Orange Line, Red Line, Green Line, and Mattapan. Many of our bus routes, I believe about 80, and the Fairmont commuter rail line. All the others, not to say they're not important, but when we think about the system as a whole, we consider them less essential. And we're saying we are willing to accept lower frequency and in some cases suspension on these routes and these modes so that we can maintain quality access and quality service in that top left box. And that essentially is the Forging Ahead framework that we walked through with the public and the board last late fall, early winter. And when we think about the combination of both what is essential service and that reduced service on that non-essential service, those together are what we've called our base service, which is what we asked the board to vote on in December. And critically, the most important thing here is that for many of those who are using those essential services, our intent for the service will continue to look very similar to what it was pre-COVID. It may not be exactly the same, but it should look similar. And then on the non-essential services, where we also reduce service, we are not expecting to significantly increase crowding because the analysis was based on where there's ridership today and where we're expecting some ridership in the near future. So to that third bullet point, all those services in the top left box should be at or above the service delivery policy, which again is our minimum acceptable standards. And then we're going to be providing a reduced level of non-essential services. So for example, a reduced, and I'll go into more detail in this shortly, reduced peak and midday service on all other commuter rail lines other than Fairmont, with weekday service ending earlier, and no weekend service on some lines. Reduced frequency on those remaining non-essential bus routes, including a small service area and some consolidated routes. And that impacts the ride as well, which we'll get to in a second. And then finally, it also had an impact on the ferry, but those changes were put into effect last month. So again, focusing on those changes that come into effect this March and April. Okay, moving to Shannon. Thank you, Donald. And then finally, before jumping into the details, I did want to speak directly to the CARES Act 2. So the MBTA, after that December vote with our board, we did receive about $300 million from the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, also known as CARES 2. There's a lot here, but to simplify, those funds will be used entirely to reimburse our operating expenses, consistent with the funding guidelines. That then frees up, essentially allows us to use $300 million in net revenue dollars for other expenses. And we've tried to be consistent with our Forging Ahead framework to best utilize those $300 million. So some of it is being used to restore some of the service versus what was voted in mid-December, specifically restoring some of the bus service, as well as continuing to provide commuter rail service on weekdays after 9 p.m. And some of that funding is also being used to restore some of our capital funds. So to partially also cover our budget deficit, we were planning on pausing a number of capital projects and moving about $460 million of capital funds to fund our operating expenses. With the net revenue, we can use about $179 million to ensure that we're continuing to fund more of our capital program. So I realize there's a lot here, but essentially to say is with CARES Act 2, the MBTA received $300 million. All of those funds are going to use operating expenses, and then with the net revenues that are now available, using them on a mixture of both capital and service and the capital funds are being programmed as part of our fiscal 22 capital planning process. I will now go through the specific mode changes, starting with the subway. So this spring, this goes into effect on March 14th, which is a Sunday. We will be reducing frequency on the green line, orange line, and red line. And again, if you remember the ridership slide, I think they're around 20-25% of pre-COVID ridership. 20% sounds like a lot, so I think it's worthwhile to go through what that means in terms of schedules, or we call it often headways or times between trains. So for example, on the red line, previously, if you were waiting for a train on the branches, whether that's Ashmont or Braintree, you originally would have been waiting 9 minutes between trains. It'll now be approximately 11 minutes between trains. And if you're in the trunk, which is JFK to Alewife, it was 4.5 minutes, and we now expect it to be about 5.5 minutes. Midday, again, will go from 14 to 16 minutes on the branches, which is approximately 7 to every 8 minutes in the trunk, which again, the trunk is when the trains are running together, both the Ashmont and the Braintree, so JFK to Alewife. The orange line, we expect to go from, rather than running every 7 minutes during peak, to every 8 minutes. And in the midday off peak, rather than every 9 minutes, to every 11 minutes. And the green line, the branches all, rather than being every 6 to 8 minutes during peak, we expect to be around every 7 to 10 minutes. So for the key takeaway here is for the green line, orange line, and red line, we are expecting most travelers to be waiting typically more about 1 to 2 to 3 minutes more than they were previously. The blue line frequency is being reduced by a significantly smaller amount, approximately only 5%. And that's really changing in the peaks, going from 5 to 5.5 minutes, and some of the midday from 9.5 to 10 minutes. Importantly, though, we are also adding some service to the blue line as well, because we had been seeing some higher ridership in the afternoon. So I believe we've added some additional service in the 1 to 2 p.m. block. And encourage everyone who's looking for specific subway schedules to go to www.mbta.com/schedules/subway. And again, these schedules should be available online specifically in late February, early March. And again, these changes will go into effect on March 14th. I will now move to the bus changes. So we're going to talk through these on a route by route level based on a number of categories. First up, noting that overall, once the spring service changes are implemented, the MBTA will be running about 90% of pre-COVID service hours. There's a variety of impacts going to affect. So will be one route in the spring that will actually have higher frequency, and that's the route 236. There are a number of routes that will have decreased frequency. They're listed here. It's the 10, 11, 21, 29, 31, 39, 47, 61, 71, 73, 77, 89, 93, 96, 101, 112, 134, 220, 222, 225, 501, and 504. There are routes where in some cases we're increasing the frequency in the day, and other parts of the day we're decreasing frequency. And again, trying to put the service where we're seeing the ridership to match demand. And that's the routes 1, 16, 32, 57, and the route 70. And again, there are some routes that we are suspending. And that's the route 18, 52, 55, 68, 79, 212, 221, 465, and 710. In some cases, there are readily available MBTA alternatives within a quarter mile or a half mile. In some cases, there are not. And strongly encourage everyone who uses those routes who needs an alternative to please go to the MBTA trip planner. There are also additional details at www.mbta.com/service changes. And again, these changes will be going into effect on March 14th. And then the second set of bus changes, we are consolidating some bus routes. So the routes will still continue running, but they'll be running consolidated. There are some already in effect. These are the new ones. So the routes 24 and 27 will be consolidated. The routes 136 and 137 will be consolidated and running one loop up around the lake. The routes 214 and 216 will continue to be consolidated. And I believe the route 217 is being consolidated and essentially covering some of the area that the route 212 was formerly covering. And again, for all these, please check out the trip planner or our website for more detail, as it is available over the next week or two. There are 3 routes which we are reducing their hours of operation, so they'll be operating peak only. That is the 67, 85, and 131. There are 2 routes that will have routing changes. So we might be operating slightly different routes, whether it's based on time of day or day of the week. So that's the 211 and 435. And then there are a series of routes that we are not reducing service or changing significantly. But if you ride any of these routes and depend on certain trips at certain times of day, strongly encourage you to check the schedules once they're available online to make sure to see if your trip time has changed, right? If it was an 8:05 trip, maybe it's now operating at 7:45. So strongly encourage you to check the schedules. And this is the routes 9, 19, 36, 42, 45, 60, 80, 105, 108, 202, and 240. And then finally on bus, we are working very closely with the Boston Public Schools to identify and support all students who are potentially impacted by these service changes. So Boston Public Schools is, I believe, reopening their schools in a hybrid phase manner starting March. And we are currently expecting that BPS students will be most likely to be impacted by the suspension of routes 18 and 55. Boston Public Schools Transportation will be reaching out to families over the next month, and they will be mailing letters to families of potentially impacted students in late February to notify them and provide support in finding alternative options. And here we've listed a couple support resources that I hope for any of you who are parents of BPS students or caregivers of BPS students. We both have the MBTA trip planner, which can help students find the best route to and from school. There's also a wealth of information on the BPS transportation website. And if you need additional support, BPS has asked that we offer both the transportation hotline they operate, which is at 617-635-9520, as well as their support portal and email, which is schoolbus@bostonpublicschools.org. Now I'll switch to commuter rail. So before I go into the detail on commuter rail, I would like to clarify that we are expecting to release our new commuter rail schedules next week, not this week. So we don't have as much detail as we have in the following week. So for any of you who are looking for commuter rail specifics, we'll go through at a high level right now, but we'll be announcing that probably next Monday after our board meeting about the specifics of how service will be changing throughout the weekdays. At a high level though, in the spring schedule, which goes into effect on April 5th, note this is different than the schedule for bus and rapid transit. We will be continuing to have lines that provide weekend service. That's the Newbury Rockport line, Framingham Worcester, Fairmont, Providence, and Middleborough. And we will continue to have lines that do not have weekend service, which I believe has been in effect since January. And that's Greenbush, Kingston, Plymouth, Fitchburg, Franklin, Haverhill, Lowell, and Needham. And please note, the Winchester Center on the Lowell line station is closed until further notice, and passengers should consider Wedgmere as an alternative. And then we will also have station closures for the Plimptonville, Pride's Crossing, Silver Hill, Hastings, and Plymouth. And that is due to very low ridership at each of those stops and the very close by proximity of alternative stops that do have available parking. Also on the commuter rail line, did want to take 1 second to discuss that in support of a construction project to install federally mandated safety technology known as positive train control, we will be suspending commuter rail service between Littleton and North Station on the Fitchburg line starting on March 1st, and we'll be running shuttle buses between Alewife and Littleton. The service beyond Littleton will continue to operate as normal, but there will be 2 options, both a local route that will go from Littleton to Alewife, stopping at every stop with the exception of Silver Hill and Hastings, and an express route that will operate Littleton, South Acton, and Alewife. And this will run from March 1st to May 2nd. A few quick things about the shuttle. Customers should not expect to pay on the shuttle or for train service between Fitchburg and Littleton. However, we do expect customers to pay a regular fare on the Red Line at Alewife. All shuttle buses are fully accessible, and the shuttles will be scheduled to meet the commuter rail departure and arrival times at Littleton. And customers should consult the updated schedule online for shuttle departure times and for more information. And then finally, I will cover the ride. So 3 changes for the ride. The first is starting on March 14th. Some ride ADA trips may become premium trips, complementing the changes on the fixed route. So when we change the bus system, it can have an impact on the ride system. Though importantly, the overall ride service boundaries will not change. It is a question of ADA versus premium fares. Secondly, the scheduling window will change for the ride. So scheduling window will go from 40 minutes versus 30 minutes currently. And then finally, once the commuter rail changes are put into effect on April 5th, there may be some changes as well to our premium service hours. And ride customers impacted will be notified in advance of any of these changes via the US mail, seat drops, media, etc. And then we'll just summarize next steps, and then I'll hand this back to Angel. Thank you everyone for your patience, by the way. So today and next Wednesday, we will have the public meetings on the upcoming changes. Again, the presentations will be the exact same. The one difference is we'll have more detailed commuter rail schedules next week. We plan to continue to share this information to ensure that our riders and customers are informed through all platforms available. And then again, the bus and rapid transit changes will go into effect on March 14th. And some of the ride changes, those impacted by the bus system. And then on April 5th will be the new commuter rail schedules, and again, some premium ride hours may be adjusted to complement the commuter rail changes. And then throughout March and May, we will continue to review new ridership, our crowding, our service patterns, working closely with the school systems to determine when and how to add back service, both for the summer and the fall changes. And for bus and rapid transit, the next schedule change would be in mid-June. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Angel. And again, thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy nights to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Kat. I'm going to provide folks with some instructions. Questions can be submitted via the chat pod. While we may not get to all questions, all comments are part of the official meeting record and will be shared with the MBTA leadership. To make a comment aloud, you must virtually raise your hand. To do this on the computer, please press Alt-Y or click the raise hand button at the bottom center of your screen. On a mobile device, simply tap the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. I'm sorry, on the phone, please dial *9. Once you raise your hand, you'll be added to the queue with others who have raised their hands. I will call on folks on a first come, first served basis. However, if there are some elected officials that are here tonight, I will call on them first and then move on to others as they've raised their hands. I'd also like to add that when it is your turn to speak, I will say your last name or the last 4 digits of your phone number and let you know that I am unmuting you. If you're on a computer or a mobile device, a box will pop up at the center of your screen. You will need to confirm that you would like to be unmuted before you begin speaking. If you are on the phone, an automated recording will let you know that you are unmuted. You may speak as soon as the recording finishes. Once you are unmuted, everyone in the meeting can hear you. Before making your comment, please slowly state your name and any organizational affiliation. Please remember to speak slowly as we have interpreters working with us this evening. Please limit all comments to no more than 2 minutes. We ask that you only make 1 comment so that we can ensure everyone gets a chance to speak. As soon as you are finished, you will be muted again. Following that, I'd like to open it up for some elected officials. I think I had seen Representative Kevin Honan was on the line, and I'm not sure if he's still here. Representative Honan could raise his hand and let us know if he'd like to say a few words. Give him a minute. If not, I'll ask. I see that we have some folks from some offices here. Ann Cushing from Senator Mike Rush's office. I know if you wanted to say a few words on behalf of the senator, I'm going to ask to unmute you. And I've asked to unmute you. All right, having a bit of a technical difficulties. There were some questions that were posted on the chat, which we will try and address. And the first question that I saw, what is ridership and what is being measured to generate that figure? The answer to that is on buses, automated passenger counters count on and offs by stop, regardless of fares. Gated subway stations are measured or you're used to track folks on the subway, and other systems are in place for the commuter rail and ferry and the Green Line service. The next question that someone asked is, are the buses replacing trains, wheelchairs accessible? And if not, what is the replacement plan? Also, is there a plan for informing the public or otherwise providing transportation at any times the elevators or other access that are out at Alewife? Thank you. I
Angel, do you want me
believe
to jump in on this one real quick?
Yeah.
So just to clarify, yes, all buses that will be operating the shuttle are fully accessible. They are going to have lifts, not ramps. But we are actually working with the vendor who will be providing this to make sure that all of the bus operators are retrained in all of the lifts to make sure that accessibility is not an issue during the shuttle. And it's something our shuttle coordinators will be watching very closely throughout the entire period. And in terms of AOWIFE, that is a great question. I think we're good right now, but we'll make sure I'll follow up with the team that's in charge of this and just talk through that. If that does come up as an issue, making sure we have a contingency plan in place. So thank you for raising that one.
Thank you, Kat. I'm going to stop there for some of the questions, and I'm going to open it up to folks to ask. I see there's some hands raised. I am going to ask to unmute Miss Lori Bent, who had raised her hand, and she's a member of the select board.
Hi, thank you for taking my comment. Yes, I'm chair of the Weston Select Board, and I wanted to talk about the closing of 2 stops on the Fitchburg commuter rail line, Silver Hill and Hastings. First off, I just want to say that closing the Hastings, just one person, but it's a terrific hardship on an elderly rider who takes the train to his cancer treatments in Boston, and he now has to walk a mile to Kendall Green through the snow on a busy road. So there's just a personal hardship there. But overall, I think it's short-sighted. And this is a problem specific to Hastings and Silver Hill, which is most of the users of those stops walk to the stops. And it is true that Kendall Green is there and it's a mile away. However, these people will now have to get in their cars and drive to Kendall Green. And, you know, most people in Weston have cars, so that's okay, except that the Kendall Green stop, the parking there is extremely inadequate. Basically, if you don't get to the parking lot in normal times, if you don't get to the parking lot by the first train, then you cannot count on getting a place to park. So essentially, and that's a regional parking lot that serves a lot of communities. So essentially, you're telling these people, if you can't park at Kendall Green, then forget it, you can't take the commuter rail. And so all of these cars are going to wind up on the roads. So it's not a particular hardship situation, but I think it's very short-sighted because you're making the trains less convenient and you're forcing cars on the road. So this is really in direct contradiction to the state policy of trying to reduce carbon emissions and increase use of public transportation. You're essentially forcing more cars on the road. So I urge you to add back those stops as soon as possible, at least until Kendall Green can be assured of having adequate parking. And as I said, this is a regional issue. People drive from all of the western suburbs and park at Kendall Green. They're all going to be forced out of that stop, either because of the additional cars parking from the Hastings and the Silver Hill stops, or, you know, just because there simply is inadequate parking overall in that area. So I think considering these stops in isolation of, yeah, there's a stop a half a mile or a mile away, it makes sense on paper, but in reality, it doesn't make sense because it's totally dependent on the availability of parking, which is very inadequate. So thank you very much for taking my comment.
Ms. Bent, I'm going to have someone from our team give you my contact information so we can get some information regarding that constituent and see what other services we might be able to provide.
Thank you.
Next, I am going to call on Marina S. And I'm going to ask to unmute you. Marina, I've asked to unmute you.
Thank you for giving me a chance to ask a question. I was asking it many times of almost everybody who was available on the chat. and completely ignored. The schedules for the new buses available now, or if not, when they would be available and where they're actually available. I also, even though I was not asked, since I used to live in Weston, wanted to remind Lori that's very close by, there is an end of the Green Line with plentiful parking. So all the commuters from the Western commutes can certainly park there. It's a huge parking lot at the end of the last stop of the Green Line, and it's only over 128 right there. So if they drive in anyway, it takes another couple of seconds just to get from Kendall Green to the end of the Green Line.
Thank you. We will make a note of that.
And then to respond to the specific question, the bus and rapid transit schedules, we are currently expecting those to be available online in early March, but we'll begin posting service notifications at impacted stops in the next week or so.
Thank you, Kat. And bear with me one second. Next, I am going to ask to unmute Miss Mary Fukuda. I hope I pronounced her last name, and if I did not, I apologize.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Marie Fukuda. I'm with Fenway Civic Association and a Fenway resident. Thanks for taking my comment. I just have to say, as a Fenway resident who is having a bus line, the number 55 eliminated, it was discouraging to hear about services, late night extensions happening at the same time that our suspension is occurring. I think, you know, the word short-sighted is very apt. If you're talking about what it takes to suspend and then rebuild a bus line, the fact and taking into account that the MBTA advisory board found no justification for the cuts and recommended that they not occur, it's just very disheartening for those of us who live in the Fenway. So I guess some of my questions are around the suspensions. So one would be, how long are suspended routes planned for suspension? Secondly, how do you plan to evaluate demand for a service that you're cutting? We do have a lot of people who rely heavily on the number 55, including seniors who live in the West Fenway. It's a vulnerable population, and again, I think goes against some of the goals of the MBTA to cut that service. I realize that we're in that quarter mile, but to think that a senior can get from their housing sharing a green line with people who are going to Red Sox and other venues that is already very heavily used by the Longwood medical area, it's not a great proposition. It might work on paper, but I think for people who live here, it does not. The other things I just comment on is that the Fenway has millions of square feet of development that are now planned and that have incorporated the number 55 into their plans. So I think if you're talking about a short-term suspension and return, communities like ours that have put bus routes into transportation planning really need to be evaluated seriously. And I guess lastly, I'd just like to say, reading that the MBTA advisory board recommends a return to service commission, a question about how you're planning that, and kind of my comment that I hope the Fenway will be heavily involved in that process. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Kat. No, I don't know if you want to take a stab at answering some of those.
Sure, and thank you, Maria, and thank you for your comments. And I don't think I'll be able to answer them all, but I'll do my best. From a high level, and I'm sure there are others on the call who are wondering how long, if my route has been suspended, and there are other routes suspended even prior to forging ahead due to COVID, when is it coming back? And I think I wish I could give you a better answer. I really wish I could. I think the question is we don't know. And I say that for two reasons. One is I think all transit agencies are trying to figure out how ridership will come back, when it will come back, where it will come back. And one thing that we worked with MassDOT and their Office of Transportation Planning on is putting together a variety of scenarios about how ridership might come back over the next year. And there's a wide range of possibilities. So I unfortunately just cannot give you a specific timeline. Anything if I did, it wouldn't be necessarily true. But what I will say is we look at ridership throughout the system on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and have, as that Raj has seen, we are constantly saying what's changing and what's going on. And we plan to continue to do that throughout the spring, summer, fall. And again, we're trying to be as thoughtful as possible, as well as not just the ridership was very point in time, but great to your question of like, what about the routes that are suspended? And I think on that is like, we've been working with surveying large employers, talking to school systems, talking to municipalities, trying to understand if you're an employer downtown, when are you planning to bring your employees back, if you're planning to bring them back? When you bring them back, how often are they teleworking, do you think? As well as looking at driving patterns. So trying to not only look at ridership, which is very point in time, but as much as possible looking at other more leading indicators to help inform that so we can make some guesses. And it's the best we can all do is try to think of like, what will ridership look like this summer and fall so we can plan accordingly. And I think the final thing I'd say also is put in a plug for bus network redesign, because that's, I think, one thing too that we're really keen on is when we eventually go back to service, full service, we know it will look different than what we're operating pre-COVID. All of our lives have fundamentally changed because of the pandemic. And I think as part of bus network redesign, one of our main goals is trying to look at how have origin and destination patterns changed? Are people trying to go to new places they weren't before? Are jobs in new places? Are homes in new places? And make sure that the system that we're operating, not just the bus system, but the entire system, is at best meeting our community. And so I think that's a very long-winded answer to say, we don't know yet. We're trying to be predictive as possible and welcome all puts from all people. And if there's anyone who is not on the employer survey and your employer, please get in touch with us. We'll add you to the survey. And then 3, knowing that when we do fully rebuild the system, it will absolutely look different than pre-pandemic. And I think that's a strength that we want to lean on. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but Marie, you asked some great questions.
Thank you, Kat. Next, I am gonna ask to unmute Sarah Matz. Ms. Matz, I'm asking to unmute you now.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Sarah Mattis, and I was served on the Lincoln Board of Selectmen from 2000 to 2012. And during that tenure, I was also the representative to the MBTA Advisory Board. So, and in addition to that, I worked with the 128 Corridor Coalition, which was working on transportation planning. And I fully appreciate the dilemma you all are working with. And I think you're trying your best, robbing Peter to pay Paul, among many other things. All that said, I have an incredible concern about service cuts on the commuter line at the same time that the state is pushing communities along the commuter line to expand housing, to expand density. There's been pressure to change zoning and would have a dramatic impact on many of the smaller communities. It feels like the right hand isn't working with the left, and I would urge you to address that in some way. In addition, it would be extremely helpful to begin to work with some of these local communities on expanding parking opportunities. They may exist where you may not be aware of them, but please do look at, in this period of somewhat of a hiatus, in preparation for the commuter rail to return in some way, shape, or form to expand parking. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mattis, for your comments, and we'll be sure to make note of that. And this is something that we've heard from other elected officials, and we will continue to monitor that and work with our other with our colleagues over at EOHED. Next, I am going to ask to unmute Alex Bison.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I'm Alex Bisson. I'm a professor at Brandeis University, and as a professor and I deal with students and employees at Walton region, I also ride the commuter rail every day. So I want to just do a very short comment, and then next I wanted to approach the shuttle situation that is very concerning. So the first the comment that I want to say is just that I would love to know the system for ridership evaluation and econometrics for you, because clearly from your plot it's kind of confusing and very noisy. And we all that ride the commuter rail every day for years, we know why, because it's very hard to know how many passengers went through the system. It's very hard. It's not automatic like buses and the T. Okay, that was my very short. So we are underappreciating how many riders are there every day. So my main point is about the shuttle system that is replacing Fitchburg line. I am really concerned that you are concentrated everything in one point, a wife. So you're gonna increase the flux of people in the green and red line coming from the North Station that previously people would just ride from North Station. You're increasing the flux from the Porter Square, and it's pretty clear by the shuttle system prior to the COVID times, and then we don't expect to be better than prior to COVID times, that we're going to have problems with overloading of people, even though you claim that it's going to be only half capacity of the buses. That's very hard to enforce, and even if enforced, it's going to be hard to ensure that if you have 100 people waiting for the bus at 8 a.m. to get the early morning, ride, how do you going to do to provide buses for all these people that need to go to work? And how are you going to ensure that they're going to be, safe, and then going to start spreading, COVID in a week or two from there? So 2 months is a lot of time, and then that came like too, late for people to organize themselves. And third, just a final comment. I think it's very worrisome and then short-sighted, as many people commented, that you think the ridership will increase because everybody that can escape now from commuter rail, they just learned that they cannot rely on commuter rail, right, for the future. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? So actually revenue is going to drop drastically. That's the trend. We all know that. So how do you suggest that you're going to deal with this situation? My suggestion for the shuttles, just to come back to the last point, would be clearly that you need to create more points of like shuttles, like from North Station, from Porter, and other places that people can spread out and not only concentrate everybody from picking up from AOI. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments on that, Kat.
Yeah, I think the comments, I think I can't comment on the PTC work itself, but I will say the shuttle, we will be watching very, very close. So ridership counts for commuter rail come in multiple forms. We have both mobile tickets. We use parking as an indicator, though it's less indicative right now. And we also have conductors taking counts. And so we use that to inform the number of buses we will be operating the shuttle. So in the schedule for the Fitchburg shuttle, you might see only one sort of bus operating at 8 o'clock, but the intent is to operate multiple buses at that time. And we'll be watching ridership very closely, especially at the start. So if there is crowding, we should be able to respond fairly quickly within a day would be my imagination. And to ensure that we're still holding that 20 passenger limit for those shuttle buses. And then if it is an issue in red line, we can adjust and we can react accordingly. I think the bigger concern is making sure we don't have crowding on the buses themselves. But again, it's something we are constantly running shuttles and constantly trying to keep an eye on them to make sure they are well within our stated crowding limits. But thank you for the comments, and make sure to pass that on to the team that's running the shuttle.
Thank you, Kat. Just like to remind folks to please keep your comments to 2 minutes so that we're able to get to as many people as possible today. And if there are comments that you'd like to make in addition to after you speak, I would urge you to put them on the chat box, as this will be recorded, and we can also share those comments through that with our leadership team. Next, I am going to call on Lena Webb. I'm going to ask to unmute her. Lena?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. I'm administrative staff at Brandeis University in the Division of Science, and I'd like to speak to the fact that we're concerned about the cutting of weekend service on the Fitchburg line to the Brandeis Roberts stop. Research science, especially biological research, is not a 9-to-5 job. Mice, transgenic mice, fruit flies, you got to see them on the weekend. Your research, spans, all day. It can go till 8 p.m., 10 p.m. This is not a regular schedule, and I'm concerned that many grad students and postdocs and professors will not be able to access the campus on the weekend or later at night. And to actually touch on Lori's point, I feel like some of these assumptions about ridership are coming through a windshield bias, in that people who rely on the commuter rail, many of them don't have cars at all. And they won't have cars when we come back and increase going back to work. So, people without cars rely on this. And I have a more practical question. I noticed that 70 bus was, I believe, in the reduced whatever category. And the 70, if I'm right, the 70 and the 70A go from Waltham Center into Central Station. And if the Fitchburg line and the Brandeis line and Waltham stop are going to be reduced, will that also go along with a reduction in the 70 bus service? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments on that. We appreciate that, and you raised some really good points that we will share with our team. Next, I'm going to ask to unmute Matthew Wong. Mr. Wong, I'm going to ask to unmute you.
Test, hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Matthew Wong. I am a student at LaSalle University in Newton, Massachusetts, and I'm going to speak primarily related to the commuter rail. I noticed in one of the earlier slides, you were talking about like optimizing services with limited resources. And with all due respect, that's not what you're doing right now. And I don't know whether anybody from Keolis is here on the call, but I'm going to talk primarily about the Newburyport-Rockport line, which in this case, at least currently, the entire Rockport branch is being suspended on the weekends for the Gloucester Drawbridge. And so basically it's a shuttle bus running the entire length of the Rockport branch. But yet at the same time, you are running quote unquote Rockport trains that are only going from North Station to Beverly. And while at the same time running the Newburyport trains that make all of those stops between North Station and Beverly. And I highly doubt that demand between North Station and Beverly is that high during the winter. I could see it possibly being true during the summer, but I doubt it's that high during the winter that we need to be running essentially a shuttle train between North Station and Beverly, branded as a Rockport train, when all of the Newburyport trains, or at least most of the Newburyport trains, if not all of the Newburyport trains, will make all of those stops between North Station and Beverly anyway. So that's kind of redundant. So I propose, and I ask for the consideration that instead of running the redundant North Station to Beverly service that's branded as Rockport service, consider using those resources to provide weekend service on other commuter rail lines that currently do not have any such service, because it just does not make sense to have service that's served by Newburyport trains Yet why do you need additional service that's just turning to Beverly and not even going on to the Rockport branch at all? Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, Mr. Wong, much appreciated. And we will share this information with our commuter rail team. Next, I'm going to ask to unmute Nathan Harris. Mr. Harris?
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm also a scientist at Brandeis, so the third person you've heard from today. I see there's a number of other of us on the call right now. I ride from Porter Square to Brandeis. There's like 10, 15, 20 of us scientists that I see every single day. I have to go in, like Alex was saying, because I do experiments at the bench in person. This is a career I've chosen. I've been working in it for 10 years. It's just what I have to do. I'm obviously super frustrated because like I've heard about these changes for a week now and I have no idea how I'm going to get to work starting next month. But I actually had just like a question that I wanted to ask about ridership, which is I'm hoping ridership is measured in terms of rides per train, not in terms of rides per day. Is that right?
It is, could you, I'm not entirely sure. I'll say we measure ridership because it varies. We measure every individual
Sure.
Throughout, and then looking at the question of thinking about how many vehicles, how much space, capacity utilization, etc. So ridership is a simplification of how we measure and analyze it. But it's the common denominator across all the modes.
I don't understand. I'm sorry. Like, is it number of people taking it every day or the number of people? Yeah, is it per day or is it per ride, per train? You have a number of people per something. What's the denominator there?
The slide that we show at the very beginning, which I can go back to, this is ridership per day across all modes.
Well, how do you expect the ridership per day to come back to 100% if you have fewer trains and you have people who can no longer take the commuter rail, for example? So it's underestimating the demand.
That is a point that that we will share with our team and see what we can discuss internally. Were there any other points that you would like to make around this, specific to the schedule? Hello? I think I lost him there for a moment. If you'd like to come back on, please raise your hand and I'll note that so you can finish your thoughts there. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. I'm gonna unmute Nathan Harris. Mr. Harris?
That's me again.
Yep.
I got muted before.
Right,
that's why I couldn't
happened.
say. Thanks for answering the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next, I'm going to unmute Dina Rosenbaum.
Hi, thank you. This is Dina Rosenbaum. I'm the Chief Program Officer at the Carroll Center for the Blind on Center Street. We are very disappointed about the suspension of Bus 52, which is a lifeline to the Carroll Center and our neighboring schools. We are an adult rehab facility and we have both blind staff who use the bus to get to work. And while many companies are remote, the Carroll Center is open every day and functioning with a client census. It is also a lifeline for our clients to get to the Carroll Center, often using the bus to connect them to another bus or to the T at Newton Center to commute to the Carroll Center or to go home on the weekends. So of course, Bus 52 has had changes over the years. We've been operating without Bus 52 on the weekend with weekend service. and now you're eliminating the service totally. I'd also, so just one question that I have is, did anyone look at the fact that with eliminations of certain buses, et cetera, how it would affect the ride in the paratransit? Because a lot of our clients can use the bus or use paratransit, and that will only increase the use of paratransit. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We've heard a lot around the 52 bus, including from your state representative and other members of the delegation, in the importance of that. Next, I'm going to ask to unmute Isaac Harvey Wolf. Mr. Harvey Wolf, I'm going to ask to unmute you now.
Hello, thank you, tech support, for helping me with the raise hand issue. I am 25 years old and I live in Lincoln, Massachusetts with my family, and I don't have a car. And so I rely on the 76, which I see has had some changes to it, as well as the commuter rail to get into Boston. And I'm wondering whether you're planning on returning the weekend service once COVID is over, so that people can, use the weekend service for pleasure as well as just work. Yeah, because there's a population that uses these services, not just during the 9 to 5 period. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I would just point to the comments that Kat had made earlier. We will have more information regarding the commuter rail schedule after our board meeting on Monday. And again, you can join and see the board meeting through mbta.com on our mbta.com website. On the board dates, the first flat part of the screen will point you right to the board, so you can live stream it. So I would point you to that. Next, I am going to ask to unmute Gwyn Phelps. Gwen, I'm asking to unmute you now.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi. I am currently a rider on the Fitchburg line, and I just wanted to echo some of the comments that my fellow riders had about the upcoming shuttle service and some concerns over that. I noticed that the shuttle is no longer going to North Station like the line normally does. I personally get off at North Station, and I was just wondering the decision to have the bus go to Alewife instead. And I'm also wondering how COVID protocols will be enforced on the bus. I already see a lot of people not wearing masks on the commuter rail and don't see that that will change at all on the bus.
So in terms of the routing, happy to answer that question. We looked at a number of options, and I believe essentially trying to balancing between how long people are sitting on a bus and sitting in traffic or navigating all the way to the North Station. It's a lot more tricky on a bus than, say, dropping passengers off at Alewife, allowing them potentially a faster connection into the city or wherever else they might be going if they're trying to get to Porter. And then in terms of mask protocols and COVID protocols, like I said, we will be trying to enforce a hard 20 passenger limit, as is our procedure on all of our shuttles since COVID. And then terms of the mask wearing, as I think many of you are aware, it is now a federal executive order. I'm going to get the language wrong. Might need Angel's help here. Essentially, that anyone who is traveling public transit is required to wear a mask. And we are in the process of putting that signage throughout the system and expect all of our passengers to wear it.
Kat, that's correct. President Biden had issued a directive through the FTA in all public transit modes that requires the wearing of masks. And I would also add that the MBTA, we have been pushing mask wearing, and we've been putting signs, and we actually have a campaign around this that I would urge folks to check out on our website. It's called Ride Safer, mbta.com/Ride Safer. You can find out all of our cleaning procedures and the protocols that we go through, and how to ride safe riding the MBTA. So we have been pushing that. That campaign came out, I want to say it was late last spring, as COVID was starting to ramp up, and we've continued to push that. In addition to that, I would also add that we received generous donations of face masks, and we've been, in our police department has been distributing that in select stations throughout the network. So we are encouraging folks to do that, and we're doing everything we can in our power to ensure that that's enforced. Next, Ms. Phelps, was there anything else you'd like to add? I've asked to unmute you.
Oh, yes. No, that answers my question. Thanks.
Not a problem. Next, I am going to ask to unmute Fujiko Duke. I'm going to ask to unmute you now.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm Fujiko Duke. I just wanted to start by supporting Lori Bent's comment about commuters walking to Silver Hill and Hastings Station. I am somebody who used to walk to Silver Hill, and now I have to walk to Kendall Green. And personally, the closing of Silver Hill has been frustrating for me. My question is more about how much the MBTA actually saves by not stopping at, these two stops that have already exist, especially since the stops had only been 1 or 2 times during the day pre-COVID. It seems to me that you would be losing more in revenue than gaining it just by, not stopping and potentially, getting people that would pay to take that ride.
Thank you for that comment, Kat.
Yeah, I happy to jump in here. I'm sorry that I'm not, I don't work closely with the commuter rail team, so I don't know the specifics, but I do know we talked extensively about this last fall and winter, and it comes down to a number of things. One is the operational impacts on the rest of the line. And that's particularly true in Plymouth, where serving Plymouth, I think, adds nearly 40 minutes, I think, round trip to the overall service, as well as some maintenance costs for upkeep, shoveling, salting, etc. So there are some costs associated with it. But just to answer that. But yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. Next, I am going to ask to unmute John. I lost him there. Next, I'm going to ask to unmute Olivia Nichols. Olivia, I've asked to unmute you.
Hi, my name is Olivia Nichols. I'm with the organization Green Roots, and I also ride the T commuting from Mission Hill to Chelsea. And tonight, I just wanted to express how disheartening it is to hear that the 112 is one of the 24 bus routes that will be facing decreased frequency, particularly given that group that I'm a part of, the Chelsea Transportation Task Force, which has been led by residents of Chelsea and transit riders in Chelsea. We finally achieved a much needed additional bus on that route in the fall, only to be hearing now that that's going to be taken away with this decreased frequency. And just also wanted to comment that frankly, I don't think any bus routes should be facing any decrease in frequency because like the 112, these buses serve elderly folks and other vulnerable folks who need safe and reliable service every day to get to the grocery store, to get to Market Basket in Chelsea, to their jobs, to medical appointments. And so just more broadly wanted to voice that it seems here that the decision making that the MBTA is making isn't or is misaligned from what people riding these services are asking for. And would also just like to echo that I agree with multiple folks who have also been commenting tonight, pointing out kind of the flaw we're hearing in terms of how do people expect ridership to be coming back if services being decreased like this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We much appreciated. Kat, I didn't know if there was anything that you wanted to add to that.
No, as in all of them, we will continue, Olivia, to monitor and keep a close eye on ridership on all of them, all the bus routes.
Thank you.
The one thing I will say though, Olivia, on that, one thing I did not mention tonight that is important, there are a number of high ridership bus routes that have been durable throughout the pandemic, where we are actually now running more service on them than we did pre-COVID. So like the 116, the 117, the 111, the 104, the 109, we are not changing those routes at all in the spring. They will continue to have above pre-COVID levels of service on them because we know we continue to have very high ridership and some challenges with crowding as well.
Thank you for that, Kat. That's a very important point. Next, I'm going to ask John Baranzini I'm going to ask him to unmute himself. Hello.
Hi, thank you. I'm a postdoc at Brandeis who's dependent on commuter rail for my research in biophysics. So hi to Colby, Alex, Emily, and others who are here tonight. I know we're representing a lot of others who I see regularly on the Fitchburg line. Ironically, throughout COVID, my lab has been working on antiviral solutions to COVID. As Emily said, this research doesn't end on the weekend. It doesn't end at 5 p.m., but like it turns out the NBA is going to end it. So that's too bad. Personally, I chose to live where I am based on the commuter rail and my trust in the commuter rail. But these changes have proved to me there's not really a commitment to public transportation in Boston. I'm forced to now buy a car and move, right? So I just wanted to point out a couple of technical points. The plots that you showed about the commuter rail on slide show dramatically the effect of MBA's changes in service. In mid-December, when you cut rails and you saw a dramatic drop of over 30% in ridership on the commuter rail. No other mode of transportation shows that drop, right? So, but you continue to make cuts, which is surprising to me, right? And the other side is that other people have pointed out problems with your analysis. Another is that simply you don't have data for the commuter rail. And the data that you show actually shows that there's been an increase in ridership, and you've shown the highest ever recorded ridership on the commuter rail during COVID. Of course, we expect that's incorrect, but that just points out the problem with your data. But mostly I want to speak for others who are less fortunate than I am, right? So, and the MBHC's new policy ignores and solidifies the inequality that's a historical part of the Boston community. These justifications of cutting lines leverage defining communities as wealthy and capable of transporting themselves, right? But this completely ignores the most vulnerable in those communities. It marginalizes those who are the lower income people in these wealthy communities who don't have access to transportation. These cuts leave those who are most vulnerable stranded in transportation deserts, right? So, it was my thought, I guess very naively, the idea of transportation was to focus on those who have needs for transportation. Forgive my naivety, but the short-sightedness of these policies leave me wondering if the MBTA values its vulnerable ridership at all. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your comments. Next, I'm going to ask Emily Palmer to unmute. Emily?
Yes. Hi, I'm Emily Palmer, and as John said, I work at Brandeis in the Division of Science with Lena, and I just wanted to echo a lot of what you've been hearing from Nathan and Lena and Alex and John, that I work with graduate students in the sciences who are coming in and working and doing research in their labs. And this this plan would make that very difficult for students who rely on public transportation. And a number of students have come to our office to express their distress about this. And particularly, we have a lot of students who have moved here for their first year of graduate school, and they're already working in labs. And so on top of, figuring out their new life in graduate school, they have to worry about how they're going to navigate public transportation. So I think that this is a real concern, and it's for students, it's for postdocs, and for staff and faculty. But I've definitely heard a lot from students who I work with directly, just how stressful and difficult this will make their work. So I just wanted to share my concerns that other people have voiced about this change.
Thank you, Emily, for sharing your comments. And we will certainly be taking a look at that. Next, I'm going to ask to unmute Roy Harvey. Roy, I've asked to unmute you.
Thanks very much. I'm from Lincoln, and I have a question of the commuter rail, and in fact, the same line as the Brandeis people. So I was just wondering if a startup with a lower cost structure than the MBTA wanted to operate on the commuter rail lines when the MBTA is not, using their own equipment and their own personnel, would that be legal? And if so, what restrictions or regulations might apply? Thank you.
Roy, I very much appreciate the comments. I do not think we are qualified, the right people to answer that question. I think that's very much a legal question.
I will second Kat's comment. Yes. Next, I'm going to ask to unmute Jaja Ayer.
Hi, my name is Jaya Ayer. I am the community organizer for Fenway CDC. I know Marie Fukuda prior to me spoke about concern about the 55 bus, and I just want to echo that. The 55 bus serves a really diverse population of the Fenway, including our seniors, lower income communities, and folks with varying disabilities. It's really critical that this bus service come back. I realize that the cuts are now kind of finalized, but echoing what other folks have said, this is definitely a reminder of the ways in which Boston continues to perpetuate systemic inequalities, systemic racism, in thinking about what lines are cut, what lines are expanded, and who is most impacted. It's disheartening to hear that there isn't really a clear plan to bring particular lines back. Even on the website, there isn't anything indicating that the 55 could even come back. We have seniors, we have folks with disabilities who need the bus in order to get to where they need to go. Walking several blocks is not an option if you need a walker, if you're in a wheelchair, or if you are older and just may slip on a piece of ice. It's really unfair and really frustrating to see that this lack of forethought is kind of there. I realize budget cuts are often an seemingly inevitable fact to services like the MBTA or other community services, but at the same time, the board clearly indicated that it was unnecessary. We have a president who is very much pro public transit. Funds are being funneled into the MBTA, and once these cuts are over, it's frustrating to see that these these cuts and these forums feel, at least right now, as though they are not going to be productive because no one is giving a straight answer as to what's happening. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your comments. Very much appreciated. Next.
Angel, I could jump in there real quick because I think it's an important point. There's a very clear distinction I just want to draw, and I thank you, Jaya, for your comment. I think there's difference to say that we can't commit to a date yet, and not that we can't commit to a plan. And so over the next, and we didn't get into detail here, but over the next few weeks and months, I think we're going to start having that conversation with the board about what are our ridership projections, what are potential scenarios, what could rebuilding service look like, and start having that conversation. But it's just that we don't want to commit to a specific date because we don't know for sure yet and don't want to mislead or not promise something we can't deliver on. It is a minor difference, but I really do want to make that point just to be clear that we are working on a plan to think through how does one rebuild service in a post-pandemic. Sorry, Angel.
Nope, not at all. Thank you. Thank you for putting that out there, Kat. Next, I am gonna unmute Annie Hokins-Dahl. Annie?
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
Hi, thanks.
Yep.
Hi, I'm also going to talk about the commuter rail. I love taking the Greenbush line, but, well, I've been taking it from a couple of years, and I work at Boston University Dental School on Albany Street. So I take the Greenbush line in the morning. I work 8:30 to 5. Coming in the morning is great, but now with the changes, the first train back after I get out of work at 5 is 5:10. There's no way I can make it from Albany Street to South Station at 5:10, and the next train isn't until 8 p.m. So I don't understand why there's no train in between 5:10 and 8 p.m. For people who do work and we want to go home, and I don't understand why I have to wait 3 hours. I do take the ferry now, and the ferry has a lot of reductions also, and there's no weekend ferry, there's no weekend Greenbush line. I do work on Saturdays. So I don't understand what's going on with the commuter rail. Personally, I think it all has to do with money. Sorry, but why is there no train between 5:10 and 8 p.m.? And you're going to extend later trains, but there's nothing in between 5:10 and 8 p.m. Doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Annie, I'm going to take a pass. Thank you for that comment. And Angel, if you don't mind, I'll jump in real quick. Is really important point. Thank you for highlighting this. So we're talking about new commuter rail schedules that go into effect in April. We have been running a reduced commuter rail service since I want to say mid-December. And that was driven specifically due to COVID. So we had a number of essential populations in our commuter rail operations who had to take leave of absences because they were sick with COVID, which meant that we could not operate safely our full commuter rail schedule. So in mid-December, we reduced significantly our commuter rail schedule to something that looks a lot more similar to what we operate during snowstorms. And I think we've made some minor modifications to it since then. And again, I apologize that I don't have all the details. I don't know the commuter rail schedules nearly as well as other modes. But what we've been working on closely in coordination with Keolis since then is for April 5th is when the new schedules go in, trying to put together a schedule that really takes advantage of essentially nice, even service throughout the day that are very efficient and optimized, and we're really excited about them, working with what we can. So that's the schedules I think will look different in April 5th than they do right now. And it's not just running service, say after 9 p.m., but it's really changing the entire schedule. And I'm sorry that we can't share more information with you right now, but we will have more information next week. But I just want to clarify, the schedules will look different on April 5th, taking that into account. But thank you for raising that, because I think it is a really important point to raise, that we've been running reduced schedules since mid-December, I believe.
That's correct. Thank you, Kat. Much appreciated. Next, I'm going to ask to unmute Stefan Wench. I believe it's how you pronounce your last name. I apologize if I did not get that correctly.
Yep, Stefan Wunsch. Yes, pretty close. Thanks, Angel. First, just a note of thanks. We got a Zoom bomber. Just a note of thanks. Excellent, good work. Just a note of thanks that not only is tonight's presentation and this meeting been exceptionally well done, as the others have been, but the project has been very well communicated. I know it's painful to be doing these, but just a word of thanks for taking this seriously and doing a really extraordinary job getting the messages out. My question is pretty simple, because the MBTA website for trip planning has an excellent visualization of the route on a map, very interactive. The route specific pages also have a very excellent live map. Is there, or could there be, a way of displaying the spring service changes in an interactive way where someone could visualize a route, for example, that's being discontinued, and sort of highlight and select and deselect, for example, routes around it, to visualize the alternate service in a way that I haven't been able to find how to do. If you don't know the answer, that's completely fine.
Can you hear me? I do not know the answer. Kat, were you going to say something?
Yes, I think the short, Stefan, thank you, by the way, always good to see you. I think the long and short of it is we tried a number of things and it turns out to be very complex to implement. So it is something that we are thinking about, and candidly, I think it is something for bus network redesign. I think we would love to have a tool like that, but it's something we've been working closely with our customer technology departments, OPMI, but just all the data together and all the variants and all the segments, it was something that currently we did not have a tool available that could easily do it, and it's something we'd have to custom build, I believe. But I think that is the answer. I might be wildly wrong, but we can go with that for now if you're willing to take me on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Next, I'm going to unmute Mr. Matthew Wong one more time, who had just raised his hand. I just asked to unmute you. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm surprised that this hasn't been mentioned, and I mean, pardon me if it will be mentioned later, but on January 29th, 2021, an investigation that I believe was being led by NBC 10 Boston, and was later shared with the MBTA Advisory Board, discovered that despite the massive drop in ridership in the past year, low revenue and service cuts, that there are several MBTA executives that received upwards of $160,000 in bonuses over the course of 2020. I'm sorry, but what? Here we are talking about budget cuts and service reductions, and while we're also getting executives receiving huge bonuses, that's not okay. And I'm not going to attempt to shame anybody for that, but because I understand that kind of stuff does happen in business all the time. But just because it does happen all the time does not mean that it's acceptable. And that's not it, assuming that this investigation is true, which I have no reason to believe it's not. That is not an appropriate use of limited resources and limited funding. That kind of money should be going towards providing more complete service and not having to eliminate services entirely. And so I just wanted to make sure that issue was brought up, and I'm kind of half expecting somebody to bring it up first, but it's not a good thing if we're spending this much money on executive bonuses rather than service levels.
Thank you. I do not have the details on that to respond, so I'm not going to comment on that any further. If folks, thank you for sharing your comment. If other folks would like to raise their hands again and participate, please use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. And if you're on the phone, you can simply do that by dialing *9. So I'm going to do one last call for folks to see if they want to raise their hands or have any other comments or regarding our service changes. And if not, I'll give everyone about a minute or two, see if there's anyone else wants to raise their hand. I see one more. Conan Hum. Conan, I've asked to unmute you.
Yeah, is this the appropriate forum to also talk about the changes that have already been implemented? Is that okay?
If there's specific questions, sure, we can. If we can't, I would urge you to reach out to us at publicengagement@mbta.com. And if there's something we can't answer here, we will make sure to respond to you via that email. So go ahead and ask a question and see if we can answer it now.
Well, it's not a question. It's a comment about what's my experience with the service change on the 6276. And actually, there was a small adjustment done to it. I'd like to just begin first of all say that I don't see the coronavirus infection control protocols being consistently applied on at least the bus that I ride on, such as roof vents being closed or windows being locked and unable to be opened. Some buses have it's okay, but some buses they're still locked up. But I have to say on the 6276, I try to catch the L'Express buses which leave on the let's say 4:30, 5:30, and the MBTA bus, it doesn't leave on time, and it might leave up to 10 to 15 minutes late, even though I see the bus and the driver already at Alewife, and it's always a nail biter trying to catch the L'Express. I even have to ask the L'Express to hold their bus for 5 minutes or 10, or I sometimes miss it, and it's not working, and I'm being forced to look for other alternatives. I've looked at the Rev Shuttle, but it only goes at 5 p.m. But really, I'm also seriously trying to consider getting a used Corolla, Toyota Corolla, and just drive until it drops. But once I do that, I'm gone from the system.
Thank you for that. I don't know if I don't have an answer on that.
Well, basically, I just like to say that I think consistency is pretty important when you're doing schedule reductions, and that's not happening, at least in my experience.
I could jump in. This is Melissa DeLay from Service Planning. Nice to hear from you again. And certainly this is something that we had been corresponding with the L'Express office about if there's a way to adjust schedules. And I know they'd given you the phone number so that you could call for that connection. But this is the first that I'd heard that wasn't really working reliably. So let me take this offline and we can coordinate and see if there's something more. I don't have all the details on hand right now, but I know there were some other schedule options that we were looking at with the L'Express service that would be a more robust solution, I would say. So, but thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Melissa. I do not see any other raised hands. Again, just like to thank folks for joining us today. And if there are other comments that you do not, or other questions that you have, you can, again, I encourage you to email us at publicengagement@mbta.com. Again, that's publicengagement@mbta.com. And our group of liaisons will direct the questions to our internal teams. And I think tech support just put it on the chat, and we can answer some of your questions there. If there's no one else that would like to raise their hands, I would like to take the time to let the meeting end. Again, thank you for joining us. And again, if there are any other questions, please reach out to us at publicengagement@mbta.com. We appreciate you joining us today. And again, next Wednesday, I believe we will be doing our next meeting regarding the service changes. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.